So I wanted to welcome everybody here. I was asked this week to do the history of the church. And in conjunction, next week's was supposed to be the windows of the church. And it got combined this week. So I'm now doing the history and the windows. So I had to sort of shorten the history. But you're going to get the basics.
How long are we going to be here?
Not very? I've really shortened it. How's that? Who has ever taken a look at the history of the church that was done by Mr. Peterson through 1980, from the beginning to 1980? Patterson, sorry, thank you. Is anybody taking a look at that? Now, doesn't show. Okay. And has anybody ever taken a look at the stained glass windows that has been on the website? Or there is a booklet on the windows. Okay. So basically, this is going to be new to about 80% of you, which is great. So the history of Trinity actually starts before the year 1886. And the Episcopal Church had its beginnings by a local group in Binghamton in 1810. Christ Church was built shortly thereafter. And Christ Church is the oldest church in the city. As Binghamton expanded in population, so did its membership. And they were thousands of members of that church. So what was decided, I believe, that Good Shepherd, which is across on the south side, was built prior to Trinity. And in 1883, a group of members from the church considered the feasibility of forming another parish on the west side of Binghamton. The Shenango River had a toll bridge, one toll bridge. So it was to go to Christ Church from the west side of Binghamton, you were going over a toll bridge each and every time. So they decided that there should be a church placed on the west side of Binghamton. So it seemed in 1886, the time was right for that venture to start. And an invitation went out in the Daily Republican newspaper, and it read, "All interested in the advancement of the Episcopal Church and establishment of a parish on the west side of the Shenango River are earnestly requested to meet at the home of Ray Clark at 59 Main Street on Saturday, March 6th at 7:30. This includes a cordial invitation to the ladies." It was signed by John Ray Clark, James Weldon, John Anderson, and Moses Stoppard. They were all well-known businessmen here in Binghamton. Much planning went into the action, and they called their first rector before the church was built. The rector was a Reverend Sidney Cook. And on May 2nd, 1886, the first service of Trinity Church without the church was held at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Byron Marks, which was on Main Street, which is where the American Legion is now. That was their home. So that's where the service started. These are the relatives of Gail Bump Fortner. And I believe the picture in the common room is Mrs. Marks, which is your great-grandmother?
Yes.
Okay. And so when you're in the common room, take a look at the pictures. They're of Gail's relatives. During that year, an architect, Lacey, a T.L. Lacey, no relation to Rob, was contracted, and they designed a chapel, not this church. There was a chapel on this site for 10 years. And if you've ever looked at the pictures that are in the hallway in the office. This is a picture of the chapel. I could pass it around. If you just pass it back and forth. You're going to see that the chapel was pretty much just a basic square building, and it had pews and it had some of the furnishings that we have today. But the church grew and grew, and they had to add 50 feet onto that church, onto the chapel. I'll call it the chapel. And so the addition of 50 feet, the church originally sat east-west. What they did was to pick up the chapel, turn it north and south, just as our church today is, and they expanded it 50 feet. So the windows in it were like a Palladian-style window. I believe they're a triptych. Have no idea what the windows originally were. But that chapel was here for 10 years and served the congregation well until they decided to go with Bartow and Lacey, which was an architect from New York City that designed this church. And it was designed in a high Victorian Gothic style. The fun fact, I love Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang, and he always does fun facts. Well, this is a fun fact. Anybody have a clue as to where the blue stone that this church was built with was quarried? Any idea? Guildford. So north of us, up by Oxford, is a little town Guildford. That's where all the bluestone for this church came from. And that Bartow and Lacey, which was the architect, also designed the Baptist church, which sits just down the street on the opposite side. If you've ever been in the Baptist church, you're almost going to see the same buttress system, except their sanctuary is in the round. So their buttresses are like this. And same wainscoting, same wood ceiling. It's almost like taking Trinity and putting it in the round. And it's just interesting to me how they turned one idea or design into another. But there were also a lot of other buildings in downtown Binghamton that are not churches that were designed by Bartow and Lacey. Okay. I think a big portion, or a big important portion of Trinity Church is the rectors. Anybody have a clue as to how many rectors we've had? Or want to take a guess? 10? Any more? Any other guesses? If I include Paul Donovan as an interim rector, we've had 12. I already mentioned to you about Reverend Sidney Cook. Sidney was here from 1886, and his health deteriorated in 1889, and he was unable to finish to continue as rector. And in 1890, he passed away. At that point, Trinity bought a plot of grave sites over in Spring Forest Cemetery, and just over here, and Sidney is buried there. It's off in a corner, and thanks to Bill and Jim, they found the grave. And it's an interesting stone. It's a wood, it looks like wood, it's stone, but it's a cross. And at the base, it says that it's Sidney Cook. So a couple years ago, Bill, Jim, Robin, and I went over and we planted some hosta and cleaned up the grave site.
Where is the cemetery?
Yeah, it's actually where the Boys and Girls Club is. If you went towards the hill, is that big one that sits on the hill, Berry Hill. Okay, so anyway, and then in 1890, after he passed, a Reverend Henry Clapp came in 1890. He also did not survive. So the very first two rectors passed away. So he died in 1893. We had a little bit better luck in 1893 when the Reverend James LaRoche was called to be the rector. He lasted till 1903. And then a Reverend Randolph Hegman was from 1903 to 1917. Wilson Tanner was here from 1917 to 1943. Percy Rex, and I'm starting to get into the rectors that some of you may remember. His daughter actually came a few years ago. She wanted to come back to the church. She was a little girl, and she remembered running up to her dad, grabbing his leg while he was doing the sermon, and stood there, and he just continued on with his sermon without any hesitation. But she remembers that. But she was really glad to come back and to see how Trinity has evolved. Then there was the Reverend Thompson from 1953 to 1976. And Art Dorson was here from 1976 to 1995. Noreen Cerner came in 1995 to 2007. And then Paul Donaker, which was our interim rector, was here from 2007 to 2011 to get us prepared and ready to take on through that discernment process. He's also took on the responsibility of a capital campaign that did this whole church over again, which I was very surprised that he would take that on as an interim rector, but he did, thank God. Then from 2011 to 2015, Reverend David Drabert was here, and presently we have Gwen. So, my fun fact, there were 12 rectors, one woman rector, which was one of the first women ordained to the priesthood. Before Noreen was ordained, there was a huge upheaval in the Episcopal Church as to whether a woman should serve as a rector. Now, just before she was here, she became ordained. The span of the rectors totals 135 years that this church has been in operation. There's been 6 rectors that were here for 10 years or less, and only one that has been here for 26 years. And 2 died while they were rector of Trinity. So, and I'm going to go back to a little bit of the 1800s. 1889, Reverend Cook's health began to fail, and by November could no longer discharge his duties. And in March of 1890, Mr. Cook died before he reached the age of 40. So that was our first rector. And so, I mean, he was very, very young, and it's just odd that he would have passed so quickly. In 1893, Mr. Marks died, which was one of the founders of the church, and was the home of where the first services for Trinity were. And shortly thereafter was when Reverend Henry Clapp also died. So, I mean, within that very short period of time, 2 rectors have died. You're trying to start the church, you're trying to build the church, and I can't imagine the frustration that they probably had gone under. So, in 1896, the stone had been milled, and a gift from C.M. Stone of $25,000 was gifted toward the building of the church. And because of the many gifts that came in to build this church, they decided from the name of Trinity Church that it would become because of memorial gifts, decided to rename it as Trinity Memorial Church, thus the name of Trinity Memorial. So in 1896, the foundation of the church was dug, the church was going up, all the bluestone had been laid and pointed, and the plastering began. The whole cost of the budget for this church was $54,000. To us right now, that sounds like somebody's salary for a year. But for them, that was a pretty hefty budget. An Easter offering that year of $1,400 enabled the completion of the church. And Mr. Weldon had died by that time. And so that was the very first window. I'll get into the windows later, but that was the first window that went into Trinity, and it was donated by Mrs. Weldon in his memory. What happened to the original chapel? It was lifted, just like it was turned before. It was lifted and moved back to about where the kitchen and that end of the gym is. And that became the parish house. And it was that way for a while. I looked through a whole bunch of old newspaper clippings. There's this one site that's just fabulous. It's Fulton.com, and it deals with all these old newspaper clippings. And in the beginning years, Trinity, because of its center aisle, was the place to get married. And from the amount of newspaper clippings and weddings, there had to have been a wedding here every single weekend. And they were just elaborate descriptions of what that the bridesmaids' dresses were in taffeta, and they had cascading bouquets, and the flower. It's really interesting how they describe the weddings. In the original design of this church, if you've never seen this picture, if you want to pass that around, this is probably a picture from 1920. And what it's showing you is these pendant lights were actually chandeliers that, if you look at the bottom of each one of these buttress supports, there's a little point coming down. That was the gas to light the gas lights. They were chandeliers that were hanging from each one of those throughout the church. The choir area, which is up that way, it was not always blue. It was very ornate. It looked like a lace, and you'll see it in the picture. The bottom half, which is all cream color, was painted with an ivy tree print, like the tree of life. And the top really was lacy and leafy. But it was in a rusty, I'm trying to think of a tan color. And all of the church was painted in this tan color. And it was painted like as if you had big blocks of cinder block or something like that, big blocks. And so it was just outlining that to give it an appearance. The one big thing that you'll notice is that there was a stained glass window that was up in the ceiling. It leaked tremendously, and they decided to take it out because it was just causing too much damage. But it was a skylight, stained glass window up there. There used to be a soundboard, like in the old English churches. There was a soundboard that came out over the pulpit, big round. the number boards used to be on the walls, not back here. So when you see this picture, you're going to just take note of all those things that I just pointed out. But that's the original design of the church.
Jeff, somebody told me once there used to be a window behind where we have that drape. Is that true? It's never been a window.
No, never a window. The original altar was actually not that. That was added in 1940, and it's in memory of Mr. Tanner. The altar rail, all the eagle, the lectern, or the eagle and the pulpit are all original. They were here in the beginning. But the altar itself was actually forward about 3 feet. And if you've ever been over to Christ Church, and that's the only way I can explain it, it had this big ornate altar behind it. It had a beautiful triptych of the angel St. Michael. And I don't know, I've heard stories that they just felt like they were worshiping an angel when they came. I mean, there's angels all over up there. The chairs have angels, the altar has angels, and they took it out and put the wood reredos in, and the curtain. The curtain used to be a dark maroon, as you could see in another picture. And this curtain, the blue and gold, actually the material is from, I believe, Paris, France. It was expensive, really expensive. So the outside of the church, the roof was a terracotta barrel roof, kind of like St. James Church if you drive down Main Street, a terracotta barrel roof. And years after, they must have had leaks, and they went to not a slate, but shingles. And then when we went through in 2010, we didn't go for funding. If we went for funding and wanted to replace this roof, we would have had to deal with historical preservation, and we probably would have been forced to put a terracotta barrel roof on. We didn't go for funding. We didn't have to take that on. So all we had to do was get it past what roofing we wanted, and we chose a composite rubber roof that looks like slate. And it's got a really good lifespan on it, hopefully. If you notice, Christ Church went through a few years earlier and redid their slate roof. There's been times when I've been at the Lost Dog and look up. There's just half a dozen tiles of the slate that are cracked or have fallen or they're out of place. We have not had any of that because of how we redid the roof. So, I'm really flying along here. The chairs that are up in the altar area, the two that have the angels on them, I don't know if you've ever really noticed how ornately they are carved. They were done by a German carver that was in the style. If you've ever been to Germany and went to Oberammergau, which is where they have the Passion Play every 10 years or something like that, they are fantastic carvers, and they carve all figures and everything else. Well, he did those in the style of Oberammergau. I mean, they're very ornate. The angels are ornate. And those chairs were donated in memory of Mr. Hegman. So they have been here for a while. The other chair that's on this side is not as ornate. That one was donated in memory of F.E. Tate Roberts. The Eagle Lectern, which pretty much every Episcopal church has, was donated in memory of Lizzie Marks Bum. and which was Gail's grandma. The brass altar rail was donated by the women of the church in memory of Reverend Flatt. The pulpit was donated in memory of John Clark, one of the first founders. The baptismal font, which sits over here, was donated in memory of C.M. Stone. And my fun fact is that it really is made of marble and stone. The wood reredos was, they redid the altar area in 1940. And so it was donated in memory of Reverend Tanner. The litany desk, I think that there's one over there, these two. The litany desk and the original processional cross, which is the cross, the small one that we have used for years and years and years. And every time it started tipping because the brass itself was giving way. So we've retired it. And so the new processional cross was donated just a few years ago by George in memory, not memory, but in honor of Sally for her birthday. And although I want to include these, the banners that are around the church were all created and sewn, lovingly sewn, by Sheila Morris. And so they're hung in the rafters and almost a permanent fixture here. And this banner over here is newer. It's within the past few years, and that was by the design and donated by Marcy and John Hewlett. The cushions that are up there, all the little blue cushions that are around the church, the cushions that are on the worship leader's chair, the priest's chair, and the two chairs up there were all needlepoint, and they were done by the women of the church. There must have been a group of women that got together and did the needlepoint.
And that was directed by Stephen Guzman's grandmother, Billy's mom.
Okay. So just going back a bit, in 1945, so you've got the church here, you've got the old chapel, which is now the parish house. In 1945, an electric light on a Christmas tree sparked and caught the tree on fire, which caught the whole parish house on fire. Did not survive it. But in 1950, the parish house, they needed the space because the church was growing, continually growing. And they needed the classroom space and the other space to just expand. So the parish house was completed in 1950. There's some records from that time, and it's just interesting. The records show that there was 66 baptisms, 104 confirmations, 26 marriages, 35 buried. The parish included 1,976 baptized members, 1,265 communicants. So for us, on a Sunday, we count, and it's part of our annual report, the communicants become a very important figure. So there was 1,265 communicants, 422 children in church schools. And thus,
What year was this, John?
around 1950. Thus the need for that building. And subsequently, the building of the Trinity House just 10 years later. The church was expanding. But anyway, there were 633 participants in church activities. So that would I would believe that would be like the groups, the different committees, all the activity that went on in the church. So in 1960, they needed to expand a little bit further, and the Trinity House expanded the footprint of Trinity's facilities. And that added some much needed bigger space, a dining room, a place, the common room for meetings. And, so that was added in 1960. Also in 1960, the organ was redone, the Cassavant organ. The original organ, this was not here, Tim just added this, but the original organ had a big facade that was like this, just on that side. And the old organ just sat in there. In 1960, the Cassavant Ferris Limited came in and with the donation of from Virginia and Conrad Klee, the new organ was installed. And I think Tim has gone through a lot of the original organ and what he's done now. And so that the organ has taken on a whole new life. In 1983, the creation of the Hoyt Room was completed. It used to be just an open stage. It didn't have a wall here, and it was just an open stage. They enclosed it, and there was a donation by the Hoyt family, why you would call it the Hoyt Room, to redo that room with furnishings and to make it a gathering area. In 1998, the church went on the National Register of Historic Places, which has really given us a boost in a lot of ways by being on that national register. 2010, we had our successful capital campaign, which allowed us to put the new roof, all the electric, and boy, the electric in here needed to be redone. It was all the old cloth-covered wiring. It was an accident waiting to happen. So in 2010, we were just so grateful that we were able to have a successful campaign and to redo the sanctuary to the way it is now. I think that if you remember, I don't know who here remembers, but we used to have flying saucer lights, pendant lights. They belonged in a bowling alley, and I really question anyone's choice of putting those lights in this space. But they hung about where these are, but they were blue, like a blue megaphone at the top, and then had a big metal, almost tin-looking circle. And they never made it for me. And when we had the opportunity to replace them, I found these lights on the web. And I showed them to our electrical contractor that was working with, not Nelson, I'm trying to think, electrical contractor. Yeah, and it's down in Kansas City.
Those old lights were 500-watt bulbs, remember?
Right. All of those old lights had a bulb in them that was about this big, one bulb. And it was a 1,000-watt light bulb. And so you had 10 lights with a 1,000-watt light bulb. These are much less. The downlight may be compromised a bit. The technology hasn't caught up, and a spotlight is not available quite yet that would give you a lot more light. But we were able to uplight and downlight with 75 and 100-watt LED lights. So it never lit the ceiling at all. So we're able to really highlight the beautiful architecture of the ceiling. Boy, I'm really getting off track here. But we, even now, we have a list of items that still needs to be addressed by the new capital campaign. And some of those items have already been done, like both roofs. But there still are items on that list: the repair of the windows, the flooring in the Trinity house. Those are all things that this new capital campaign are going to allow us to address. We've been really good stewards on the buildings, and it's been said that a church is not a building, but it is the people. And that's really true. It is the people that built and maintained this building for 135 years, and God bless them as our predecessors. But the many donations that were given then and given now have allowed us to really take care of this church, to help it survive and be a vibrant beacon here on the corner of Oak and Main. Any questions about the history? That had to be really abbreviated. Yeah.
What happened to the stained glass that was up there?
That's
What did they do with it?
I don't really have a clue. I have a feeling that when it was leaking, it probably compromised the glass as well. So I believe they probably just took it out. Yeah.
For several years, I've witnessed the leakage around that.
Yeah, okay.
Well, when's that gonna get fixed?
It's easy. This has been easier said than done. In 2010, that whole arch where the welded window is was terrible. We've had issues right along. When you have a stone building and the pointing, there always is a possibility of leaking. And that's what's happened here. There's been two things. One was pointing just above the window, and that was a few years ago. We spent $6,000 through an insurance claim and repaired it. About a year later, the facing or the flashing that's up on the roof ended up getting 2 cracks, whether it be the settling of the church or just the wear on that. There were 2 cracks which allowed water to come down through. You really need to wait, but you really need to wait until the plaster is completely dry and you know that you're not going to have another leak. So it's sort of been that way for a while, but it is dry now and it is powdery. We have another issue in the bell tower, same way, and it's all dry. It's just a bear trying to find the cause. It could be a number of things. But it is going to get redone. It is ready now. It's dry. We had it repaired to that area, and it seems to have stopped the leak. Any other questions? Okay, we're on to windows, and this won't take us long on the windows. Okay.
1206.
The stained glass windows. There's 3 different styles of windows in the church. The first is a Tiffany style, the second is a Gothic revival, and the third is a Craftsman Gothic. The 4 original windows from 1896, or those first beginning years, the Weldon window is in a Tiffany style. Back about 15, 16 years ago, Will Dodge, when he was here, had the window removed, and we had to repair it. What some wonderful salesperson did was went around the city of Binghamton and told every church that you need to put plexiglass on the outside of your windows to protect them. And every church went through and put plexiglass on it. The thing that they didn't realize was that when you don't vent it, it cooks in between the two. When you cook your stained glass windows, the lead is compromised, and the weight of the window starts pressing on itself. So the window is bulging. We have some bulging of some of the smaller windows. Thus, within this campaign, we've been trying to plan a window like a year, and we just don't ever seem to get to that point. So it was decided to add the windows into this campaign. And there's, I think, 2 windows that are kind of in desperate repair, and the nativity window, it's pretty much the frame that is bulged, and it just needs a new frame, the wood frame. So those, and then the other windows are minor. They're minor repairs here and there. But getting back, we'll get back to the Tiffany style windows. The window, when it was taken out, the angels on each side of Christ and the Christ figure has 3 layers of glass. Tiffany style, you layer glass to give it more depth. And that was in vogue back in the early 1900s, late 1800s. Tiffany style was the way to go. And every church wanted to have Tiffany style windows. But the use of the glass was opalescent glass, a drapery effect by having the different layers, and the use of larger irregular shapes of glass. And they did it with an etching and coloring as well, which was more of the Gothic style, but Tiffany wanted to have, it was more of a layered. The window over here, which is the women at the tomb, which is the second window, it's more green. You'll notice that one is so different than the ones on each side of it. That's the Tiffany style. It's got layers. And it gives you, the tomb itself really looks like it's glowing. The window in the back, which is always very dark because of its position and because of the layers of glass, is Cornelius and the angel. And that window was done by a woman back late 1800s. And she was from Pittsburgh. And her son, not her son, her grandson, or great-grandson came to Trinity because he found that her window was here. So we got a little bit of a history on who she was. And within the, I won't go into it now, but within the write-up on the windows, you can have a whole accounting of who she was and what her life was and how she, her art studio expanded. The women at the tomb, the Annunciation, which is up here. I turned the light up. We have to back like that. But that one is also one of the original windows of the church. So basically, if you look at it, there's 4 windows that are all on the east side of the church. I can't tell you what the windows were, all the other ones looked like. If I was a guessing person, I would guess that they would have looked like the windows that are in the sacristy or the windows that are out in the bell tower. Just a plain cross and just that goldish green glass. There really was no write-up on any of it, but in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, they started adding all these beautiful Gothic style. And the Gothic revival came in vogue around 1910, and Tiffany was out. Everybody wanted the Gothic style. And it was more of a medieval or Gothic looking window, and it was more reminiscent of what was in Europe, what was vogue in Europe at that time. The majority of our windows are done in a Gothic revival. We had several different studios that did these windows in the Gothic style. The first was the Nikola Athenzo, He was an Italian born. He was from Philadelphia. And he has windows that are in Princeton University, the Folgers Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C., the National Cathedral in Washington, and in Riverside Church in New York City. Pretty prominent places that hired him to make their windows. His windows here at Trinity include the Palm Sunday, which is very hard, it's dark to see because that window sits under a little tower that's here. So it's not one of the brightest windows in the deck. Christ and the Little Children is one of his windows. Behold the Israelite, which is the next one, was one of his windows. And the women at the well, I think that is the last one, was all of his windows. They were all done. The Palm Sunday and Christ and the Little Children were from 1915. Behold the Israelite and the women at the well were from 1936. And the Nativity is also his, and that was put in 1940. So, I mean, for almost 40 years, there must have been some windows here. And I would believe that they would have just been generic, basic windows. Because if they were something special, like these, there would have been no notation of it in our history. So, the Whipple and Company and Whipple Mowbray were a studio from Exeter, England. And they did pretty much the rest of the windows. The loaves and the fish, I think, are back here. Jesus healing, and the baptism of Jesus, which is these two right here. You see Jesus getting baptized and healing. Those were done in 1968, the loaves and fish, and these two were in 1976. The big interesting thing of these windows is that in most churches, the windows were either done at the same time, and there may be one signature on the window. And within the bottom half of each one of these windows, like in this area, if you ever want to look at some churches' windows, there's going to be a signature, like right here, telling you. And 3/4 of our windows have a signature, which is totally unheard of. I had a gentleman that came to photograph our windows. He saw the window display on our website, and he was from Connecticut and came here and took pictures of all of our windows. He's the one that pointed out the little white monk. I always thought that it was from Exeter, England, the window for Martha and Mary. And it actually was done by the Powell and Son, the White Friar studio in London, England. And I would not have known that until he pointed out that there was a little white monk and told me what it was. 2 weeks later, I had the Corning Glass Rakow Research Library that called me and said, "Hey, you have a Martha and Mary window that was done by Whitefriar." And I said, yes I do. And there was like a 2-month period of time of interviews and a lot of stuff, publicity about that one window, because Whitefriar bequested all of their sketches, original sketches of windows. And the first roll that they opened, there were like 30 rolls. And the first roll that had about 30 or 40 sketches in it was our Mary and Martha window. And it was in Binghamton, and they said, "Wow, let's go look at it." So it's really interesting to see the original sketch and how the window was put to color. And they were amazed at how they had the sketch, but had no idea how actually turned out. And it was a beautiful transaction with Corning glass. Fun. The third style is that craftsman Gothic. And Henry Peck, there's only 2 of his windows, and those are in the All Saints Chapel right now. The Joseph and Jesus and the boy Jesus teaching in the temple. Those, in his style, are smaller pieces of glass. They're not the bigger pieces that are like etched and colored. They were done, they're almost childlike, like for a child's storybook. And if you look at those 2, you really see the playfulness of the glass, and it's all smaller pieces of glass. And that's what the craftsman style was. So,
Children's chapel, too.
Huh? I think
It was
that-
also the children's chapel.
Yes, that was the children's chapel.
right. Okay, so as part of the history, the children's chapel was actually done by Billy Palmer and family, and that was probably in the 60s, I would guess. And about 10 years ago, we decided to change the name of that to the All Saints Chapel when we were looking for a place for a columbarium. And so our columbarium sits in there. The chapel was renamed to the All Saints Chapel, and it's been a beautiful area for members of our church that wish to have their remains placed in the columbarium here. So that is all I have on the windows.
That's amazing.
Hey, Joe.
Frankie was just asking about the windows up in the eaves. Those are all original from 1896 as well. 10 years ago, when we went through, I couldn't believe the difference. All of those were pulled, cleaned, and refurbished. And when they went back in, the color up there changed. I mean, over the years, they were blackened by all the soot and everything from, cars and everything else that were going on. And to me, they look like little bowling balls. If you went to the bowling alley and saw all the little variegated bowling balls. But there are mornings when I walk in and the sun is rising in the east. That preview over there, by that window, the sun beams, and it's kind of like the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he has the little thing or the gem on the top of the stick, and it beams down. That's what that window does to that kneeler over there. It's almost like inviting you to. And then there are times around 12 o'clock in the summertime, the sun just hits in the front of the church, and all the gold that's in that window just pops. But what it does is it's another beam right up to that cross, and the cross just looks like it's beaming itself. I don't know. It's from being here so much in the sanctuary, cleaning and everything. It's so relaxing. I hate to tell you that, yeah, but it's relaxing being in here, just because of the beauty, but also what the sun and the beauty of what nature does to this building as well. It's amazing.
Just a personal thing is that when I'm crucifer, I get up to the front, I turn around, and I almost am always fixated on the well-lit window. And this morning, of course, it wasn't sunny, but there's a lot of mornings, depending on the way the sun is, and the sun shines through that, and it's the best part of being an acolyte. It really is. It's just to be able to
Yeah,
really
when
enjoy
you're
that.
sitting up here in the choir and you just look out at the congregation, that window, you begin to fixate on it. It's something of beauty that you need to grasp over and over and over and over again.
You know, you mentioned Spring Forest Cemetery. Conrad Clee, who made the organ possible, is buried there also.
There are a number. I was really surprised, Ellen Larkin, who passed away, and we just had her memorial. I did not realize the whole family connections with Phoebe English. She's buried right by Phoebe. I know now where they're all buried, which is great. I like to know where our members, old members are. But I was really surprised to see that connection and to see Phoebe's grave marker. John?
Looking around the church, I'm impressed by the extent to which the Trinity motif of the three circles is everywhere, including the framing of the windows and so forth.
The symbolism is amazing.
Is that described by anybody historically, that they wanted to make sure they did it?
No, but I can't say that it wasn't on purpose. I mean, it is Trinity. I mean, they're going to use the symbol of the Trinity. But the ends of the pews with the four circles and the cross in the middle, even up in the eaves and on the buttresses, they're Trinities. They're four circles. The windows at the top are three circles. Up here on the lectern, the lectern has fleur-de-lis. Fleur-de-lis for French is the Trinity because it's got the three sections to make the fleur-de-lis. The triangle, the three circles, and the fleur-de-lis are all on the needles, all in one fell swoop. Our initial symbol for the church came from this. It's got the triangle, the circles, and the fleur-de-lis. Yeah, even around the organ, the four circles. Any other questions? Okay.
Great presentation.